What's going on, folks? It's a late night here in Stu's garage. I got Steve out here helping me out. He's helping me flare brake lines because I absolutely hate flaring brake lines. It's the worst thing to do ever. But I'm really glad to have his help today. What we're doing today is we're completing the e-brake. So I'll put a link down below that shows how we custom made brackets for a dual caliper setup on the Cobra IRS. This is actually a bolt-on setup. And as far as I know, my car is probably one of maybe 5 that has this setup. And yeah, the bolt-on setup is something that's really unique. It's actually a really simple DIY. Shout out to Thomas Miata for basically making this possible. But what we're doing today is we're installing this. So what we did is I went ahead and got myself, these are the Cobra Calipers, just to update the folks that don't already know. This is a second set. We've got them flip-flopped, so the right side is on the left side is on the right, because you need the bleeder to be upwards. Since they're on the front instead of the back, they're going to be upside down. But anyways, you just have to make sure the bleeder is up. And we went and got a set of OEM lines on that. We're going to run the OEM lines just like we've got the regular stock lines. And inside the car, we've got a little hole back there that you can see. And that's where the brake line is actually going to come through. There's a brake line sticking up right there. That's going to be a T. It comes underneath my carpet all the way to the master cylinder. And this used to be a pass-through set. All I had to do is buy the reservoir and take out the line that came from the front master cylinder, and it's no longer a pass-through. So all the original pass-through lines are gone. I ripped those out. Now all we have is the single line that goes straight to the rear brakes. It tees off, and that's pretty much it. So we're gonna get that installed, and we'll show you some of that process. All right, thanks to Steve, we've got our sections of brake lines, and we got the correct fittings on each end. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna attach this end to the brake hose over here, and then we're gonna run this up into the car through the holes that I showed you earlier. And the reason we're doing it that way is just to make my life a little bit easier. So we're actually gonna run the line, bend it in place, and then fasten everything down so that everything's out the way, and that is not going to be resting up against the shock, because that's no bueno. Alright, so now we've got the new brake line running up along the control arm right next to the OEM line. Just like it runs normally, and we've got it running up inside the car. And as you can see, there's a line sticking up there, there's a line sticking up there, and there's the middle line. And we're gonna go ahead and get ready to tee all of those together. So we've already flared these ends, so all we have to do is screw those in. We still need to flare the middle line, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that and then connect everything together. Okay, so here we are in the back seat. The back of the car is this way. I'm actually sitting inside the hatch right now. So of course we have the brake lines coming from each wheel. These are the hard lines, and you can see how much is sticking inside the car. You know, these lines were like 1.5 feet long, so you don't need a whole lot of line to actually reach from the inside of the car or wherever you tee it to the actual brake hose, because the brake hose is pretty long. Yeah, it's a little bit bootleg to run the lines inside the car like this, but a lot of people do this setup for drift because it's just easier. Nobody really wants to be attaching all this stuff together underneath the car. If you do, that's great, but I personally hate doing this kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna look for the easiest route possible. And you know, it's gonna make it easier for me to service this or check it for leaks and things like that with it being inside the car. Nothing actually holds the rear seat in. I can just pop the rear seat up, look at what I need to look at, and put it back down. Or I don't even have to run a back seat at all, but I like to have a back seat, so I'm gonna run one. So anyways, we've got the lines pointed to where they need to run. This line right here, which used to go to the front, is now pointing to the back. And what we're gonna end up doing is cutting this line, you know, right around here, and we're gonna add an additional flare to that, and we're gonna take this this T-fitting right here, and it's gonna install right in between there, and that's gonna complete the system. Okay, there's going to be a link in the description to my initial e-brake install, but I had mentioned it in that video as well. You're going to need to get yourself a pipe cutter. or tube cutter to cut your stuff. You're way better off with the little one like I have here because you can fit into more spaces with it, and it's just way more versatile. Also, I wanted to point out, before I did this install, I thought I was going to use these grommets, which is here and over there, because it would make it super easy. Most cars have grommets in those locations that you can use. Even a Mustang would be easy to use, but with me having the IRS, it was a little bit difficult for me to actually route the lines in a safe position and use those grommets. So it's just something for you to consider. You don't always have to drill holes. It worked out better for me to drill holes, but for you, you could simply just poke a hole in those grommets and run your hard lines through there. Alright, as you can see, now we've got everything flared the way it needs to be flared. Ideally, I would have liked to cut this line here. That way everything would just meet up naturally. The reason why I cut it long is because I usually mess up my flares, and when you mess it up, you have to cut it back at least an inch because you need space for the tool and everything, and then you have to keep flaring it. So I pretty much gave myself to mess this thing up like 3 times before, you know, we get all the way up here with it. I got it on the first try, so it's a little bit long. It's not a big deal because I can still bend these things down. I just have to add a couple of extra bends into it to make this thing conform the way I want it to. But we're gonna go ahead and connect this T up to it, and then the whole system will be done. Alright folks, here's the finished product. We've got this thing bent down to conform to the trans-tunnel hump back here and fit nicely underneath the rear seats. I also have it secured in place with a couple of racing ties. Not that it's ever going to move anywhere, but you know, just in case. Sometimes I take the seat in and out, whatever. It's just good to have everything held down into place. So that's pretty much it for this install. One other thing I wanted to add, even though this car's got the IRS and dual calipers, and this is probably realistically only one of about 5 cars that have this type of a setup, the lines, the way you're going to run the lines is going to be the exact same if you have a solid axle. John Duncan makes a really great dual caliper kit for a solid axle car, and you can buy those from him. I'll put a link in the description. Also, if you're dealing with a more stock Fox body and you want e-brake abilities, good news for you, your stock cable e-brake is actually really good on your drum brakes. And you know, if it's loose, if it's not biting, you can do things like changing your brake shoes and pads. And if it's not tight, you know, just make sure you have good cables. And also, one trick that you can do is you can actually pull it up a few clicks and drive in reverse like 10 yards, and that tightens it somehow. I don't know how it works, but I know that it works because it actually worked for me. I discovered it by accident, and then I actually read about how you can do that. So I've tried it, I've done it. So those are your options, folks. I'm not gonna bleed the system today because I still have more work to do on the brakes in general, and it's just not really part of my timeline at the moment. But before this car hits the road, I'll be bleeding the system. I'll be coming back, checking all of my fittings, including the ones underneath the car for leaks, and from that it should be good to go. So that's about it, folks. Thanks for watching. Check you guys out next time.